Welcome back to the Injury Prone Fantasy Football Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Edwin Porras, Doctor of Physical Therapy, Medical Analyst, FantasyPoints.com. Gracias por tus oídos. Before we get started, make sure you are going to Underdog Fantasy. You are using promo code Injury Prone. You're going to get up to $1,000 matching on there. I know you like to play a little higher or lower. I know you like to bet on some WNBA, NFL. I know you like to put that money to work. So, Underdog, use promo code Injury Prone. That is your number one place to go. Number two, make sure you just go to the show notes. Tap on the link for the Injury Prone season-long playbook. The draft guide is out. You're going to get it as a courtesy, but the season-long playbook. You want to know how long your running back with the high ankle sprain is going to be out? Use the season-long playbook. You want to know how, your wide receiver off of a hamstring strain will perform? Season-long playbook. That is down in the show notes. Now, listen, week one, it's a whirlwind. There are a ton of injuries, but today who I want to talk about is Jordan Love, Christian McCaffrey, Puka Nacua, and of course, a little Kenneth Walker. We'll get right into it because it's been crazy, right? So we hear about this Jordan Love injury. Initially, there was some concern for ACL. If you go to my Twitter, you would have seen that I was more so concerned for a high ankle, which he's been cleared of at this point, and a kneecap dislocation. They never confirmed that. The Packers never confirmed that. I stand by that on video. It's pretty clear that he has a kneecap subluxation where it goes in or goes out and comes back in. That would also explain his pain response. In addition to that, the Packers have confirmed that he has an MCL sprain. So they haven't placed him on IR. They probably don't plan on doing that. That doesn't necessarily implicate that he won't, be out 4 weeks. I don't think it's likely, but they really just like to have that flexibility, and they use that roster spot on him. They have no problem using the roster spot on their quarterback. What I would expect right now for Jordan Love is he's going to miss the next 2 weeks. I would anticipate he probably is not going to be back for another couple of weeks. I think at this point you can expect him to be back in week 4-ish. Week 4 is probably what I'm thinking right now. Just to be as safe as possible. There is a possibility that they bring him back in week 3, but I don't necessarily think that's the most likely scenario. I wrote an article last year. Well, it was really this spring at fantasypoints.com. Last year, we had a historical amount of quarterbacks miss 6 or more games. Or I actually think it was 7 or more games. And what we found in that one sample, that 1 year of a sample, is that running backs ate, top wide receivers did not. You're going to want to target Jordan Love specifically, especially in Superflex leagues, and target Josh Jacobs. But at this point, his receivers are unlikely to put up big numbers. Now, maybe I buried the lead a little bit with this Christian McCaffrey news, man. This was wild. I'll admit that I'll take the L here. I did not anticipate this happening. Here's why I didn't anticipate it happening. Since 2018, there have been 25 NFL running backs on the injury report with, quote, calf or Achilles. Of those 25 running backs, only 2 of the 25 ended up having another injury of the same kind. What's more, something north of 90% of NFL players in general return from a calf injury within 31 days. Those 2 statistics alone already make McCaffrey an outlier. Well, if you needed to feel even better about your decision-making, Adam Hutchinson, I don't remember his Twitter handle. I think it's at _ the real Adam or something like that. He has a good tool that matches up pretty well with my practice report statuses. And he says that of all injuries in the NFL since 2017, 71% of players who end the week as LP end up playing. All of that is to make you feel better about the process. All of that is to let you know we couldn't have necessarily anticipated this. There was no way to really know without a report that he was going to take the long route, right? So if you didn't get Jordan Mason, at this point, there's not much you can do. Now, there's only been one player in my database who's had an Achilles/calf injury, one running back, and it ended in an Achilles rupture. It doesn't mean that that's going to happen. I don't think that's going to happen. That's a very, very small percentage. There actually has been some research studied and conducted in the NBA where they see that there's actually not a correlation with calf injuries and an Achilles injury per se, although it can happen, right? It's plausible. We saw the whole thing with Kevin Durant. Now, knock on wood, we hope that doesn't happen to anybody, including Christian McCaffrey, but that is a risk. With that risk, you know me at this point, I would not say to take a big swing unless I thought it was worth it. Christian McCaffrey is a power law player. This could be the year for Christian McCaffrey to have one of his last big seasons. the 49ers, like I said, and Christian McCaffrey himself, they may just be waiting this out because they want him to be 100% before the start of the season because they know this is a long season to begin with. He has, according to Adam Schefter, he has a chance to also miss week 2. But after that, we know what he can do. Like maybe Jordan Mason showed something and he'll get a little bit more, he'll take a little bit more volume off the top. But realistically, we know what Christian McCaffrey can do. I'm currently targeting Christian McCaffrey if it makes sense. I have a super flex league. I shout out Ryan Heath, Fantasy Points Ryan Heath. He declined the trade because he hates me. I sent him Caleb Williams for Christian McCaffrey. He said no. I also sent out some low ball offers, right? You got to low ball these guys, right? I sent out a Jalen Warren for a Christian McCaffrey. You want to catch some of your league mates, maybe in some of these home leagues, not necessarily the sharper leagues, but you want to catch them in a vulnerable position where they're scared. They don't know what's going on. But I do think ultimately I stand by the fact that as long as he rehabs well, as long as there's not a setback, I do think that Christian McCaffrey is still going to be Christian McCaffrey by the end of 2024. Just understand there is some risk associated with taking that big swing, but there's no point in taking a big swing, or there's no point in taking a swing unless it's a big swing. Unless you get points per effort around here, the money lies in taking the big swings. And sometimes that involves taking risk. I will also take the L on Puka. There was anything really, any reporting other until that Greg Rosenthal report at the very end of camp just a week ago or so, that would have implicated that Puka Nacua wouldn't have been ready. My thought process was the injury happened August 4th or 5th or something like that. Week 1 was in September, whatever it was, 7th or 8th or whatever it was. And even at that point, if it was a PCL sprain, based on the video, I had this discussion with Jeff Mueller, Dr. Jeff Mueller, another physical therapist. Even at that point, having 4 or 5 weeks to come back from that would have been enough in theory. So again, another outlier scenario. We can't always get them right. I always say swing for the fences, and that's exactly what I wanted to do with Puka. Turns out the soft fade would have been correct. I will take, accountability for that. Doesn't help, doesn't make anybody feel better. But I did say before Adam Schefter confirmed it was PCL that it was probably going to be a PCL injury. That's what we found. So here's what I wrote at fantasypoints.com about Puka Nacua, because I think it explains it a little bit more concisely than I can say. So I'll take the L. My rationale was that 4 to 5 weeks was more than enough time for most injuries to recover. But they clearly rushed Puka back. Now he'll be placed on the IR and he can't return until week 6 at the soonest. If I drafted Puka, I'm looking to move him in the next week or two to a manager who starts hot just to stay alive. Reciprocally, if you start hot, you can get Puka at a discount. He's worth the stash/risk. But there is risk. Once he returns, there's no guarantee that this knee injury will respond well. These PCLs can respond very, very well, like they do in some scenarios. They can respond very poorly, like they did for Julio Jones. So these injuries are, probably to a certain degree close to the same amount of risk as, McCaffrey's Achilles. But again, Puka, power law player. Obviously, Cooper Cup bags are heavy. I just had to mention that. There was no reason for me to mention that. It's mainly because I want to take a victory lap on Cooper Cup. But if you start hot, target Puka Nacua. Last guy I wanted to mention here, mainly because of his handcuff, and he was a shout out in the injury prone draft guide, is of course Kenneth Walker. Kenneth Walker left the game with core soreness, muscle abdominal soreness, and it's not a big deal. He'll probably play in week 2. I don't think that it's going to linger necessarily for him from a performance standpoint. I do want to get across that Zach Charbonnet is probably the after Blake Corum played 0 offensive snaps in week 1. Ken Walker's or Zach Charbonnet, is the premier handcuff to have in fantasy football right now. He should not be on any waiver wires. Now, I don't wish ill on Ken Walker and his family. I don't wish I don't wish any negativity on Ken Walker. What I can tell you is that these core muscle and groin injuries, they don't necessarily go away. Ken Walker, of course, has been dealing with this groin core issue since last year, where he missed a couple of games. And then the year before that, he had an actual hernia, like an actual where, not to get too graphic here, but, the intestines do push up against the wall of your trunk, and he needed to have that repaired. That's probably in a very similar area. I don't know what the deal is with that, but there is at least an outside chance that this recurs for Ken Walker. And in a worst case scenario world, that ends in a Christian Kirk type injury, similar to last year. And if that does happen, obviously Zach Charbonnet becomes the target. So he should not be on any waiver wires. If you can get him for cheap on the low and a throw-in deal of another deal that you're doing, I would do it. He's worth the upside. So make sure you go to Underdog Fantasy. Again, you get up to $1,000 matched. Make sure that you subscribe to the Injury Prone Podcast YouTube, right? And in terms of the Listener League, I do want to give you an update on the Injury Prone Listener League very quickly before I get out of here, because I am tilting my face off. If there's no stat correction, I will lose in the Listener League, the Injury Prone Listener League, to Chillax. Shout out Chillax. I don't know what, I should have looked at what your Twitter handle is, but he is Chillexilla on Sleeper. Now, because I made a very poor decision to draft Chris Olave, I did not like Chris Olave, and I made a very poor decision to draft Terry McLaurin. Did not like Terry McLaurin. Don't know what I was doing. But because of those decisions, I will lose 121.64 to 122. For those of you wondering how my compadre Jorge is doing, I hadn't even looked, so let's take a look. George, did you lose too? Because we're going to look really bad if we got 2 losses. Oh, no, George won. Ooh, he dominated. George, you dominated, man. Absolutely. And he had Jordan Love. And you had Tony Pollard. And you had Jaden Reed. Okay, well, George's team is much better than mine. I'm very jealous, even though I'm not jealous of Justin Herbert. But, hey, he crushed. So, hey, host of this podcast, we went 1-1. 500, we'll take it. Make sure you subscribe to the podcast. Make sure you are buying the Injury Prone Draft Guide and Playbook. I promise you, you're not going to regret it. It's going to help you manage your season-long injuries. We'll talk soon.